Hello there. Thank you for watching this video. Today we're going to have a battle royale comparing the Boox Nova Air C versus the Bigme Galy in a comparison of which is the better e-reader. Just want to say a couple quick things before we get into it that I think will be helpful in providing context. First off, this whole comparison is really about which is the better e-reader. So some of the attributes that I'll be reviewing will be from that perspective. These devices can do more than e-reading in many cases, and we're not going to cover all those things that they can do. We're only going to cover the elements that I think are relevant. So it's a somewhat myopic focus. It's not meant to be a complete review of each device. It's just focused on how well do these devices perform as an e-reader with some of the other functions mentioned kind of as an ancillary to the e-reading experience. So hopefully that helps a little bit in the context. The other thing I want to talk about is there's already been a couple posts that I've read as I've kind of mentioned online that I'll be doing this video, saying that it's not a fair comparison to take the Bigme Galy, which has this new technology called Gallery 3, and to compare it against the Boox Nova Air C, which is using a previous version of Kaleido. Kaleido 3 having just been released simultaneously with Gallery 3. So a little consternation that I'm making that comparison, that it's unfair. Two things I would say to that. First off, currently Kaleido 3 is only available on 10-inch screens. So I don't like 10-inch screens for e-reading because I am using both hands to hold the device. So one thing I want out of an e-reader is I want the ability to comfortably hold it with one hand. And I find that's true for devices that are 8 inches or less, as will be the case here. So if you're looking with that delineation in mind, there are no Kaleido 3 devices in the 8-inch or lower space. So it's not possible to make a comparison like that. But the other thing I'll point out is that I have done a video where I'm looking particularly at the Bigme Inknote Color Plus, and I do a comparison of that with the same device I'm comparing today, the Air C, and I'm basically comparing the last generation of Kaleido versus the current generation of Kaleido. And the only thing I'll say about that is that they actually, there's not a tremendous jump from the previous generation of Kaleido till now. Kaleido 3 is clearly an improvement over the prior generation. The background is lighter, the colors are a little bit better, there's certainly a higher resolution to the colors in Kaleido 3, so I'm not arguing that Kaleido 3 isn't the better technology, but I would push back a little bit on how much that technology has advanced such that a comparison of Gallery 3 versus the previous version of Kaleido is fundamentally unfair. Plus, I think you'll find your perspective might change on that particular issue after you watch the video its entirety. So anyway, those are just some thoughts to keep in mind. I hope you enjoy the video, and we'll go through, we'll see which one's the winner, and then I'm going to give you my final thoughts. All right, let's do it. We're going to start off with the most important category, and how do these devices function as e-readers? The Air C is on the left, and the Galy is on the right. We're going to start off looking at book covers. We're currently in the Kobo app on both devices, and we're just looking at the home screen. They're not identical to each other, but you get a really good sense of how the colors are different on each device. And in particular, I'll draw your attention to this cover here, which is identical to this cover here. These are the same book. You can clearly make out much more detail and color in the Galy than you can in the Air C. The colors in the Air C are darker, and they don't have the vividness or the range that you get with the Galy. In particular, in terms of the range, you can notice here this sunrise, and here you can see a lot more of the gradient. So one of the neat things about the Galy is that you can use the color to appreciate book covers more, and that's pretty significant when you're considering e-readers. But let's look at the performance when you're inside of a book. I'm going to click on this 2312 by Kim Stanley Robinson. And for this, I'm actually going to change modes from HD to extreme. So HD is what's allowing the color to be at its best representation on the device, but you sacrifice some navigation for that. Extreme is a nice balance between color and navigation, and then black and white is actually the fastest mode. I won't be demonstrating black and white because these are ultimately color e-readers, but just know that that functionality is there. So in both cases, we are inside the app. Both have nice, crisp text. I can see in this case that this text is a little bit darker than this text, but that's actually something that you could change in the contrast settings. But both are very crisp text and very easy to read. Let's take a look at the navigation of each, and we'll try to turn pages at the same time. Just to turn pages, there we go. Okay. And as you can see, the AirC is faster at turning pages. If I were to go to black and white mode, it would be closer, but the AirC would still be faster. And if I went to HD mode, preserving the color no matter where I went, then it would be obviously even slower. So an advantage to the AirC in that it's much snappier in page turns. One thing to note, however, is that the Galy has this Bluetooth-enabled device, and you actually have the ability to program the buttons, and there's a wide selection of things you can have the buttons do. So in my case, I have the button advance the page on the Galy, as you can see there. Now, why that's significant and notable is that if I'm holding on to either device via the left hand, then I can simply move my thumb over and advance the page. But on the Galy, if I hold the device with the left hand, then I have to use my other hand to advance the page or bring my thumb over and try to swipe like this, which isn't the best motion. So what's nice about the Bluetooth functionality is I can have this left-handed hold while using the buttons to advance the page. So that's a very nice feature, for the Galy. With the Boox, if I hold it in the left hand, I have to either use my thumb to swipe or reach over and press. So I think that's a plus for the Galy. But navigation is clearly quicker on the AirC, while the covers look better on the Galy. If I were to kind of assess overall, just based on this particular experience, I might lean toward the AirC, but there's a caveat to that, but I'll get to that in a bit. Let's take a look at a comic book. We'll get to the home screen. The App Center. There we go. And let's see, we'll go to Kindle. I'm going to go to the beginning of each comic. Oh. And again, I'm going to go ahead and move this back in a second to the HD mode so I can make the colors stick out. Oh, we're already there. Fantastic. So here we're looking at the colors of the comic book, and we have both devices set to the best colors. The reds and the blues are way more vivid on the Galy, and even if you look at the background, you can see a lot more color definition here that looks a little more black and white here. Let's look at navigation. And as we'd expect in HD mode, we're seeing much faster navigation on the ARC. But again, look at that difference in color. You can see the yellows and oranges here, where here it's almost black and white in some cases. And where you can make out the color, it's much bolder and vivider here. You do pay for that in slower page turns. Like so. Again, this can go a little bit faster if we bring it down to extreme mode, but we do reduce the quality of the screen. Nevertheless, for comics, the Gallery 3 technology is clearly superior to the color that you have in Kaleido. It's just darker in Kaleido, more vivid. And remember, there's a higher resolution to the color. It's 3 times the resolution, in fact, from this device to this device, roughly, that is. And you can just see it. You can see it both in the color and the quality of the images. We'll just do a couple more page turns here, just to see the vividness again of the reds and the oranges there. And there's the purple. You can make out the purple here. It's completely washed out here. And so on. There's no question that the Galy is benefiting from the Gallery 3 technology, and it's a notable difference. You still have the advantage of navigation with the ARC, but here's the way I look at it. We looked earlier when we were flipping through pages, and we saw that we could flip through pages quicker through the ARC than the Galy. But if you're used to that cadence, I can actually time it. So I'm reading the last line of text, and I'm either pressing to move the page or pressing the Bluetooth button, and by the time I finish that line, the page will refresh and I can start over. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that you can make adjustments for the sluggishness of the Galy versus the ARC when it comes to reading a novel. You can't make adjustments for the image quality. So things with images, book covers, comics, etc. are going to look better on the Galy, and there's nothing that Kaleido can do about that. And for that reason, in total, I'm going to give the point to the Galy. And with that, the Galy takes a critical, early 1-0 lead. Our next category is form factor. Both devices are generally pretty nice. If we start with the ARC, it's somewhat of a basic look, kind of a plasticky case, but there's a nice tactile, tacky, if you will, back that makes it easier to hold and to grip the device. It's certainly comfortable to hold on either left or right-handed. The magnet for the stylus is quite strong, which is a nice feature. And generally the quality is pretty good. The Galy 3, same situation. Really nice quality. I would argue nicer materials. We can flip this around and take a look at the back. Just a little bit more sense of a design. You could argue it's remarkable, inspired, which certainly is no bad thing. The stylus is a little bit looser on this device. Kind of wobbles a bit. I don't think that's a huge deal. Certainly comfortable and a lot of space to hold it on the left. Not bad on the right either. One of the great features of the Galy is the smooth, rounded edges, not just in the corners, but along the spines as well. It's hard to make out on the camera, but there's actually a little bit of a curvature there. And it makes it nice to grip. The back isn't tacky, but I don't feel my fingers slide on the back either. So there's really no advantage in terms of that aspect between the two devices. If I had to kind of stop there, I probably would give the point to the Galy. But when we consider form factor, another thing we have to consider, and probably the most important thing, is weight. The AirC weighs roughly 235 grams and the Galy 320. That's a huge difference. When I'm reading a novel, I can hold on, I can take a grip, if you will, on this device, the AirC, and not have to readjust that grip for long periods of time. With a Galy, you'll find that weight, eventually you feel it, and you're compelled to try to change grips to accommodate that. So I could sit down and read, a chapter or two of a novel and never have to readjust my grip with this device, and where I might have to readjust my grip 2 or 3 times simply because of the weight alone. So for that reason, we're going to give this point to the AirC. So now both devices are tied 1 apiece. Our next category is battery life. And for this, I went ahead and over the past week read a novel, and as I was doing that, I recorded the battery drain, and I recorded the battery drain in standby mode, and I did a number of various tests. I wouldn't call my results certainly not scientific. I didn't take a lot of sampling, but regardless of the kind of anecdotal way that I captured the data, I think the distinction between the two devices is pretty stark. And digging down and doing a better job of tracking the battery life, I'm not sure would change the results in a material way. Let's start with the AirC and take a look at some key features of their battery life. First off, just during use, I estimated that, and this is just reading a novel, no front lighting, just turning pages, etc. I'm estimating about 63 hours of use from a full charge. Standby time, which is what this is, where the device can quickly go back into use just by pressing the power button. I estimate over a month of power and standby, meaning if I charge this fully and I stuck it in a drawer and I didn't look at anything, a month later, I still probably will have a little bit of juice and maybe quite a bit to work with. So it's really good standby power. Not as great as, say, a Remarkable, but since Remarkable is the best in class, it's okay to fall short of that. Still quite good. And if I had to go into a deep sleep, and a deep sleep would pretty much preserve the battery life until I came out of that, it would take about 35 seconds to come out of that deep sleep. Okay, so those are generally a sense of how the battery life works for the AirC. Let's compare that to the Galy. Not nearly as good. So doing the same conditions, my usage is estimated to be approximately 10 hours of use, well short of the 63 that I'm experiencing with the Boox. Reading the same novel, no front lighting, and quite a difference there. Same with standby. You can't even get a week of standby. The battery drain is so great. So really, when using this device, the best practice is to put it into a deep sleep. That's the only way really to preserve the battery life and not have to continually charge it once a week. And when you're in that deep sleep and you're coming out of it, that's about 50 seconds, so almost a minute, quite a bit longer than the AirC. So in every category, the AirC dominates the Galy. Just for reference, I happen to have the Bigme Ink Note color, which uses the same UI, and I don't have nearly the battery drain on that device as I have here. So it's not necessarily the system which is causing the battery drain. It implies it's something with the tech itself, or maybe a combination of the tech and the UI. Regardless of what the source is, this is a beatdown, any way you look at it, and the point goes to the AirC. So with that, the AirC has taken the lead for the first time and has a 2-1 advantage. Okay, we return outside to talk about note-taking. The AirC clearly has the more sophisticated note-taking application. A lot more features, many of which you can't find in the Galy. Things like the ability to insert files, insert a text box, to be able to convert handwriting to text, And one of the most powerful features is the ability to search. It not only looks for text, but can actually search handwriting, and actually generally does a pretty good job. So a lot of features. In addition to that, if you look at the selection of colors that are available, click on that here, there's a large selection of colors. And all the basics are included, so just a nice selection there. And generally speaking, all the colors are just as responsive. So certainly capable of taking notes on this device. It is a strength of this device. The two things that I would say, which were negatives, is the first is the darkness of the background. Now, because we're filming this outside, it's less apparent, but inside, the background is so dark that for note-taking, I do believe you have to use front lighting most of the time. It'll depend, of course, on your lighting conditions, but the background does require the use of front lighting, which we won't see with the Galy. So that's one negative around that. The other negative, and this for some people may be a small thing, it's kind of important to me, is the highlighter. I really don't like their highlighter function. It makes the text look murky. You can clearly tell that the ink is above the text. I just don't like it aesthetically. But putting those two things aside, it's a perfectly acceptable note taker and has a lot of powerful options. Now, if we compare that to the Galy, obviously the first thing that we're going to notice is, again, the lightness of the background parchment. The color that helps to make the colors pop. Indoors, you're much less reliant on front lighting because of that background, as I said earlier. The text is just as crisp if you draw in black. It's just as responsive as with the AirC. And I think the highlighting is vastly superior to what you see in the AirC. However, there are some downsides to the Galy. There are fewer color choices, although I think all the main ones are represented here. In addition to that, some of the color choices are a little odd. We just saw I drew in black and it was perfectly responsive. There's other colors that have interesting features when you draw with them. Use magenta. There's a little bit of a graphics effect there, and when I refresh the screen, that color will change. So it becomes a lighter pink, I'll put. So you can see the difference there. So a few colors exhibit that. A few colors exhibit delays. So blue is one of those where there's a little bit of a lag as we draw, so it's not quite as responsive. So if my focus on scoring this was as a note taker first, I think this would be a clear winner here, and that would have been the AirC. But because the note-taking in this is secondary to the reading, I'm looking at the note-taking more from, does it provide the ability just to do simple to-do lists, just to be able to jot down notes or do little sketches, nothing too elaborate. So I find a lot of the functionality of the Note Air, frankly, to be extraneous. If I were using this on a 10-inch screen, it was my primary note taker, that would be a completely different story. But that's not the case here. And so I'm going to score this as a tie, because both devices are equally capable of doing what I would expect of a note taker as a secondary function. Perhaps that's a bit controversial, but that is my thought process.
Given that, the AirC retains its 1-point lead.
Our next category is covers, and Boox has a rich tradition of really terrible covers for their devices, and to some degree that continues here. I will say that the cover for the AirC is, for Boox, actually one of their better devices, and it's not terrible. This is it here. It's got kind of an interesting green color, which I don't care for, but I understand what they're going for. It's kind of an old school book cover. So, I appreciate the creative design and thinking around that. I just don't happen to care for the color myself. But the way that the case operates is that there is a metal spine, and there are some contact points there. So you take the device and you just snap it in place. The hold is pretty good. And if you cover the device, the pen stays exposed, which is fine. The magnetic cling of this is so strong that you probably don't need to cover it. If I do open the cover, it does automatically launch the device as long as you're in standby mode. So not bad. My predominant complaint about this cover, other than the color, which is just a personal aesthetic choice on my part, is I just don't like this spine. It's a squishy spine. So if I'm gripping this device, and it's hard to show here, it makes the grip on the left side harder, which defeats the purpose of the buttons to some degree. So if I'm reading a novel and I've programmed these buttons to change pages, as each time I'm pressing it, I'm getting compression along the spine. It's not a good feeling at all. I just don't like using this cover. It's perfectly fine, to keep the device from, free from dust and that sort of thing. But I think those buttons were really a wasted opportunity. If we compare that to the cover for the Galy, here, instead of having a spine, it's a magnetic cover. So the magnets are here. And so you just take the device, you place it on top, it basically snaps into place, and then you fold it over like so. There's a nice flap to cover the pen. Arguably, that's a little more necessary with this device, given the weakness of the magnet of the pen to the side of the device. But I still like this and would have preferred this on the Boox cover as well. In terms of looks, it looks nicer. It just has a nicer, slicker feel. It just looks cooler. And both covers rather, are easy to remove the device. This also has auto wake feature, as you can see right there. So, not a huge gap between the different covers, but quite honestly, I'm going to have to give this point to the Galy. Just a little bit nicer, and don't like the functionality of the buttons because of the hold and the feel.
So back to the total, we now see a tie between the Galy and the AirC with 2 categories to go.
Our next category is general navigation. What's it like just to go through the menus of this device? How responsive is it, etc. We can look as we go through the different settings on the side navigation bar. The AirC is pretty snappy. Compare that to the Galy, which is also generally pretty snappy. Maybe just a hair quicker on the AirC. One thing in particular though, bringing down the drop-down bar on the AirC, super responsive. Look how easily that came up. Just a nice little swipe, there it is. Much harder here on the Galy. It takes a little bit more of a purposeful swipe to get that drop-down bar. There you go, finally. That's how difficult it can be sometimes to navigate this device. There's not a huge gap between these. Slightly snappier on the AirC, but bringing down this tray is effortless on the AirC, and it's kind of a pain in the arse here on the Galy. So, given that, kind of have to give the point to the AirC. Hopefully this is something that the Galy can kind of work on. Again, much like with battery life, I have the InkNote Plus, which is same UI by the same company, and swiping on that device and navigating is as smooth as it is here. So it's something particular to this device why it's so sluggish. But again, regardless of the why, point to the AirC.
And with that, the Air C takes a critical lead. The Galy can't win, but can they tie?
Our final category is cost. So here's the good news for the Galy. At least where I purchased, which is directly from Bigme, the cover was included, so there was no extra charge for the cover. The total cost of the Galy, therefore, $700. The Air C, the cost of the cover is extra. That's an extra $60. But the device itself only costs $400 if you buy it on Amazon.com. So even with cover, we're talking $460 versus $700. That's pretty much all you need to know. This point goes entirely to the Air C, and it's not even close. So there we have it. The older device, the Boox Nova Air C, beats out the Bigme Galy. 2-point lead. You could argue it maybe wasn't really even that close. I think the best way to think about this is the Galy is really a first mover, early adopter type of device, right? It's a relatively new technology. There's a lot of rough edges there, but there's also a lot of promise. And for people who are kind of interested in that, then they might go toward the Galy. But in balance, the Nova Air C, even though it's over a year old, remains the go-to e-reader in my opinion, as it relates to color e-ink anyway. And in fact, going forward, I think I will use the Galy as my go-to device, but only because the technology is so interesting and because it's just kind of curious to see how future updates will change and how much can some of the weaknesses mitigate and bridge the gap between these two devices. Besides, I've already purchased both of them, so there's no cost factor for me now. But if you're a normal type of user looking for color e-reading, Gallery 3 hasn't really proven itself yet. Now, having said that, recently I did notice on the Bigme site that they had put together an InkNote Color Lite, which is a version of their 10-inch e-reader and e-note-taker that they had lowered the RAM, they lowered the storage, both still very acceptable levels, and they cut the price down to $500. If they did something similar to that with the Bigme Galy, that might be a little more of an interesting value proposition for people looking for an e-reader, but even then it's still kind of on the edge, and I think there's got a little bit more development that needs to happen in this technology before it can really become mainstream and be the go-to e-reader for a lot of people. Anyway, I hope this helps, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll be sure to reply. Hope you have a great day.